So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Our Corinne True Baha'i History Book Club has 179 members from many countries, and we're so pleased that so many of you have joined us today. Thank you, Angelina, for joining us to talk about your wonderful book, John David Bosch, which we have been all reading and enjoying this month. Let's start with a quotation that dear Susan is going to read for us. It's on page 143 of the book, if you'd like to follow along. Susan, over to you.
These are the days of seed sowing. These are the days of tree planting. The bountiful bestowals of God are successive. He who sows a seed in this day will behold his reward in the fruits and harvests of the heavenly kingdom. This timely seed, when planted in the hearts of the beloved of God, will be watered by showers of divine mercy and warmed by the sunshine of divine love. Its fruitage and flower shall be the solidarity of mankind, the perfection of justice, and the praiseworthy attributes of heaven manifest in humanity. All who sow such a seed and plant such a tree, according to the teaching of Baha'u'llah, shall surely witness this divine outcome in the degrees of its perfection, and will attain unto the good pleasure of the merciful one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let me start by introducing Angelina. Angelina Allen was born into a family whose connection to the Baha'i faith dates back to Abdul Baha's visit to California in 1912. She has served as an international pioneer in several countries in Southern Africa, and for 28 years she was the co-director of the Bosch Baha'i School Youth Institute. She is the author of several books on Baha'i history. And let me introduce Robert Stockman, who is the director of the Corinne True Center. All of you know him, and everything that we do here at the book club is under his loving guidance and incredible support. I've known him for many years, and Rob has published 7 books on the faith, and I hope we get the chance to read some of them together here. So, Angelina, our book club members have sent in their questions, and Rob and I have some of our own. We'll start with questions about your background and motivation for writing about John Bosch. Then we'll talk about John and his life and how we should think about his life in order to motivate us to better serve the 9-year plan. So, Rob, let me turn it over to you to get us started, please. Thank you.
Very much. I apologize. I'm constantly trying to adjust everything to get things to work out. I'm visiting everybody from sunny Southern California. I'm in San Diego right now at a conference. So it's kind of nice to be right back in the state where John Bosch, of course, lived and where he created Geyserville. And then, of course, Bosch Baha'i School was named for him. So one of the things that occurred to us as a good place to start, Angie, and it's good to see you again, is about your own background and the fact that your family goes back to the time of Abdul Baha in California in 1912. Could you give us a little bit of an account of your family's history?
Yes, but not first without greeting, of course, Gisu and her mother. It's so nice to have a meeting together with you, and thanking you, Rob, for all the work you've done for all of us to encourage us to study Baha'i history. And I think that the people you have inspired are a whole army of us now who are following in your footsteps to document this new history of the world. So thanks to you, Rob. You've really paved the way for so many of us. I guess the story about Abdul Baha and his connection to my family's entry into the Baha'i community is when it really connects to the time when we went pioneering to Argentina. And when we were getting ready to leave for Argentina, my grandmother kept reminding my dad that he was always a Baha'i, that he didn't find the faith as as an adult, that he was really a Baha'i all of his life. And my dad kept saying, no, mother, remember, I've learned of the Baha'i faith through Lloyd Haynes. Lloyd Haynes taught me, and then you became a Baha'i through me. And she kept insisting, no, 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 you've always been a Baha'i. So when we arrived in Argentina, about 2 months later, my great grandmother died. And so my grandmother went through all of her things and found her mother's Bible. So this is now my great grandmother's Bible. And in that Bible, she had pictures of Abdu'l-Baha and all of the passages in the Bible that foretell the coming of the glory of God underlined in the Bible. And so she sent it to us in Argentina and said, see, you've been a Baha'i all your life. So it's really through two ways that our family entered the faith, is Lloyd Haynes telling my dad about the Baha'i faith, but then my grandmother reminding my dad that it goes way back to my great-great-grandmother being at somewhere. We don't know exactly what meeting she was at in California, but that she was somewhere at one of the meetings that Abdu'l-Baha was at in California.
Very interesting. And Lloyd Haynes was from South Bend, Indiana, where I'm from. In fact, his sister is still a member of our community, but she's in a nursing home at the moment. That's very, very interesting. Could you also tell us a little bit about the work you did at Bosch with youth for, what was it, 25 or so years, plus other things you did at Bosch as well?
Yeah, it was the National Spiritual Assembly put out a call for proposals for youth programs at Baha'i schools. And so this was in the early 80s. And to rethink the way we do youth programs at Baha'i schools. And so it was out of that call for a new vision for youth programs that a team of us, my father, myself, my twin sister, and our husbands, and Tracy and Larry Golar, we all teamed together to kind of rethink the way youth programs are and make them more like an institute. And so it had these different components that were given to us actually by the Guardian in his vision of what the Baha'i summer schools should be, where we study the history of the faith, but through lecture, study, and discussion. He specifically said that, through lecture, study, and discussion. And that also we think of these Baha'i schools as a place for us to train to become teachers in the teaching force, and a place where the Baha'i school is a place for the teachers to return, to regain their energy, to re-enter the teaching force.
Fascinating. And that continued until when?
2010, when we really shifted everything to the neighborhoods.
Right.
And moved all youth programs to what we see now. It was hard to see it then when they were asking us to change it, but I can say I see it now in the all of the regional training institutes across the United States are running these summer and weekend and winter youth Ruhi institutes where they take the youth through a book, then take them into the field, and where they put into practice the things that they're practicing in the Ruhi Institute. And so, of course, it's making sense to me now. At the time when they, dissolved youth programs at Bosch High School, I didn't understand it. But it's so much easier to understand this plan in retrospect. I mean, you read a Rizwan message from 10 years ago and you go, oh, of course, it makes complete sense. So it takes us time to catch up with the House of Justice.
Yeah. One of the book club members, Nancy Nesland, had a question for you. How did you come to write about John Bosch in particular? How did you choose that as your topic?
I knew when we returned from Argentina, so I pioneered to Southern Africa after I was married, but as a child, I grew up in in South America. And when we returned, I was in high school, and that was when we started going back to Bosch High School. And so I knew the story of John Bosch because Brent Poirier was the librarian at Bosch High School. And so anyone who knows Brent knows that luckily I was smart enough as a 17-year-old to say, I need to learn as much as I can from this guy. So my sister and I would hang out in the library and just ask Brent to show us, like, where's the treasure in this library? What's here that you wish people would find out about? And so we learned the story of John Bosch from what Brent was showing us. And so I knew that John Bosch was present at the time of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. And, we get used to centenaries and the importance of these markers in our Baha'i history. And so in anticipation of that, I started researching his life in anticipation of that year of 2021 approaching. So I started early with the John Bosch book, and then of course followed it with When the Moon Set Over Haifa, which really focused on that night. So that's how I really have to credit Brent Poirier for pointing me in the right direction.
And how else did you do your research? What sort of approach did you take?
I know there are many here who've done research through the U.S. Baha'i Archives, and we are so fortunate that our National Spiritual Assembly has an open door to the archives for us. And no one is barred from entering in there. And anytime you want to go into the archives and look through everything, you're free to do so. And we have really the benefit of Roger Dahl, who is commemorating his 50th year this year in working at the archives. And God give him the 20, 30 more years, because to have someone with a memory of what's in there is just a treasure. So anyway, he and Lewis Walker were the archivists at the time I was doing this research, and they are just tremendous in helping to, they don't tell you what to do. You have to tell them what you're looking for, and then they'll unlock doors. But you have to know what you want and what you're looking for. Like, for example, I remember asking them, are there any letters from John Bosch, or I can't remember which direction it went in. I might have the direction wrong, but are there any letters from John Bosch to Louis Gregory? The answer was no. And then I emailed back and said, are there any letters from Louis Gregory to John Bosch? Yes. So, so it wasn't, they weren't going to make up the question for me. You have to know what you want and what you're looking for. And then they can unlock the treasure chest for you. So it's just amazing what we have, and how many of the early believers kept paper. And now our stories are all being kept electronically. And people will be able to research all of our lives through our electronic record of what we've been doing. But thank goodness these people kept paper.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's hope we can keep a lot of electronic records as well, because that obviously is going to be a big problem if they all evaporate away. You could lose, thousands of letters in an instant that way. So that's true. Well, over now to Gisu for some other questions.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Angie. I want to read to you, for those of you who are following along, it's on page 327 of our book. I want to read what the beloved guardian wrote upon the passing of John Bosch. He wrote, "Profoundly grieve passing, dearly beloved, great-hearted, high-minded, distinguished servant Baha'u'llah John Bosch. His saintly life, pioneer services, historic contribution of institution of summer school, entitle him to rank among outstanding figures of the closing years heroic and opening years of the formative age of the Baha'i dispensation. Concourse on high, extol his exalted services, assure his wife and valiant companion of my deep felt sympathy, advise hold special gathering in temple as tribute to his imperishable memory. So that's what the Beloved Guardian highlighted about the life of John Bosch. And I wanted to ask you, Angelina, in your view, what are the highlights of his life?
You know, about this cable, my dad said to me, well, if you're going to write about John Bosch, just read the cable the Guardians wrote, because that'll give you the whole outline for the book. So, and we know that's true about, you know, like Keith Ransom Keller, he called her the valiant emancipator of her Persian brethren. So there's the story of her life in the cable to the world. So I really like the way that John Bosch, in his, if you have the book, it's on page 181, and it's in reference to that historical record card that people were asked to fill out. And of course, we have this, all of us here have access to one of these for ourselves through the National Spiritual Assembly's website. When we sign in, we can actually add to our own historical record on our personal information page. And how wonderful to have this one of John's, and how many people in, you know, of our descendants will want the same thing from each one of us. So it just might be a thing to think about, is to go to your own historical record. But he lists here, and it's on the top of page 181. He says, was privileged to be sent to that early Chicago Temple Convention in 1909 as delegate of the Californian and Hawaiian believers, was first Californian believer who went to New York to meet Abdu'l-Baha in 1912, was traveling in Abdu'l-Baha's party from New York to Washington, D.C., and was in the same party again 6 days afterward from Washington to Chicago, was in Wilmette at the laying of the cornerstone of the Mashriq al-Asghar, was present in Haifa at the passing away of Abdu'l-Baha. On day of his funeral, was called to assist with the laying of the body of Abdu'l-Baha into the coffin. So he's written what he thinks is important. And I wrote after this paragraph, I said, it's so interesting to think of the things he doesn't list, of all the other things that he did. And I love the way he writes about these things as matter of fact, as not drawing attention to himself, but just as someone who was present, but not really the mover of these events. He never, you know, of course, never interfered with who he was and with who Abdu'l-Baha was. So so anyway, answer that question. I really love that we have this record of his, of what he thought was most important about his life.
I'm so glad you pointed this out, because one of the projects that I hope Rob will talk about for 2025, as we end up each session by talking about what's happening in the Corinne True Center. And one of the things that we're talking about is to write, to encourage everyone to write their own family histories. And I have actually this marked as an example of, you know, what he wrote himself, but also what you had written that shows the difference between, you know, how it could be expanded and built on, and there could be so much more written about that. But I'll leave it for Rob to introduce that at the end. Is there a favorite story that you have about his life and that you'd like to read to us or tell?
Well, yeah, you know, of course, the one, I mean, I think for every person, his telling of being in the room when Abdu'l-Baha has passed is so, it's just really hard to even explain it. You know, he's put us all in that room with him. And we know that Bahia Khanum and they all reminded him that he's there on behalf of all of the American believers. And that's true, that we have to take that as that's real. So when we read that passage of where he says, you know, oh, Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha is still warm, it's just really personal. So I know that that's a real favorite for everyone. I mean, I think we would all agree. So I thought I'd share a different one that just really, really touched me. And it's actually two that I have to say when I was typing it up, I just, you know, you have those little moments where you go, you just, you feel the universe, or you just feel this special feeling of love in the world. And and it might surprise you which one I'm talking about. So it's on page 79, and it's the very last page of chapter 3. So if you're on a Kindle, and it might be easier to go to chapter 4, Louise, and then just go one page back. And there's just something really touching about the way he thinks about his reality and how you and I think about our reality, where it says, among the personal papers of John Bosch, there are various sheets of paper upon which he made a list of the significant events in his life. Here is a portion of one of those brief chronologies wherein he measured the years of his life based on the year he first learned of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. 1903, I read a book called Abbas Effendi. 1909, in my 6th year convention. 1910, in my 7th year, Mr. Chase. 1912, in my 9th year, Abdu'l-Baha in New York, Washington, Chicago, San Francisco. 1913, in my 10th year, Louise came to my rescue. It's just, and then he had it scribbled on a little piece of paper, you know, just like a note to himself. And you feel like you're, you know, you know, you're stepping into a very private thought. And that's where, you know, we have to be so careful when we write about anyone. The review office has guidelines for us that are given to the review office by the House of Justice. And I would sum up the guidelines as, you want to write the story that person would want you to write about them. In other words, the very best and most wonderful things about them, and not focus on their shortcomings or their failings, because they don't matter anymore. But there was another one that I just really love, and let's see if I can remember. Oh, I think it was page 77. Again, I hope it's surprising. Oh yeah, it's just one page back from where I am. Page 77. It might surprise you that this was the one for me, because I know it's different for everybody, is the way he describes parting from Abdu'l-Baha before he heads back west. And so he says, I then thanked Abdu'l-Baha for the privilege of traveling with him from New York to Washington, and thence from Washington to Chicago. He replied, I wanted you to come. And then he rose and took from the table a big cake, 12 or 14 inches in diameter, which he handed to me. Also some bananas, apples, and oranges until my arms were packed full to overflowing. That was goodbye. All these gifts I then hastily took downstairs where my guests were supposed to be waiting, but found they had at last gone into dinner without me. At 10:30, Dr. Devlin and I took the train for home. One apple and the bananas Dr. Devlin and I enjoyed on the train when we crossed the highest altitude in the Rocky Mountains, thinking of partaking of spiritual food at the highest elevation. The cake was carefully preserved until we reached our destination, then shared with the believers at the meeting of the Assembly of Abdu'l-Baha in San Francisco on May 11th. Some of it was taken to the absent ones also, and thus the faraway friends, about 40 in all, partook of this bounty of spiritual fellowship. And as I was typing it, I felt like I was eating the cake and eating the bananas and eating the oranges that he'd shared, with all of us too. So those are some of my favorite passages.
So beautiful. A 12-inch cake feeding 40 people and being preserved. I mean, wow, to think of that, it's spiritual food, so beautiful. Our friends are writing about the goats. Can you talk about the goat raising also?
Oh my goodness. Well, and I know you all know Joel Neisen and his book, Servant of the Servants, and all of Joel's work on the life of Roy Wilhelm. And so Roy Wilhelm, had all these goats that he raised, and that was John Bosch's idea. And he thought it would be just a nice little hobby for Roy Wilhelm. And so he recommended which goats he should buy and so on. And so I think that really comes from John Bosch's own cultural upbringing, is to have goats on his own property in Geyserville. And then, it's just kind of funny to think about Roy Wilhelm, because Roy Wilhelm, who didn't have children, he called the goats his kitties. And so it's just a sweet little part of their relationship. That chapter, all the stuff on Roy Wilhelm and John Bosch, is just a tickle. It's just so, Roy Wilhelm is so funny. And how he said, I can't wait for you to come to convention so I can twitch your little mustache, John. I mean, it was just so, they were so personable with each other. I really love that about them.
It's beautiful. And just to note that Debbie Hirsch has put it on her to-do list to get goats. So we'll see how that, we'll ask you next month how that's going, Debbie. Angelina, Mary Kay McCoskey has a question for you. Mary Kay?
Oh, hello. And by the way, my spiritual grandfather is also Lloyd Haynes. So there's a nice confluence. Yeah, he taught the actor who taught us the faith when we moved to Ireland.
Oh my goodness. And who is that?
Philip O'Brien pioneered. He used to head up the House of Worship organizational tours, and he decided to pioneer to Ireland. He ended up serving on the first NSA in 1972 at the end of the 5-year plan. Yeah. And he was on the set one day. He was an actor. He was on the set one day with Lloyd, and he went up to Lloyd and he said, "Why are you always so happy?" And Lloyd said, "Well, maybe it's because I'm a Baha'i." And Philip said, "What's that?" Yeah. And I think Philip became a Baha'i on the spot. And yeah, we kind of did too. So my question is, I was wondering why Abdu'l-Baha loved John so much.
I confess, Gisu sent me that question and I shared it with my husband, and we just liked the question and decided, let's not answer that. Isn't that question just, my husband said, that question is so profound. And we talked a long time about it. You really inspired so much discussion. And because what you sensed is that feeling that I felt too, is that Abdu'l-Baha really loved him. And we know he loved everyone, but he really loved John Bosch. And in a way that's a little different than, it feels a little different than some of the other relationships we know he had, especially that line where in the book where, I don't remember what page it's on, where John Bosch is explaining that he says to Abdu'l-Baha, well, I hope you can come out west, and I don't have such a nice house as Agnes Parsons, but you know, I've got a nice place. And then Abdu'l-Baha says to him, with you, I would sleep in the basement. And then John on the paper wrote, how did he know I had a basement? So there's just something really touching. And so as I was thinking about this, I think that there's a lesson for us about how Abdu'l-Baha was, how giving he was to all the questions people asked him. And thank goodness that Abdu'l-Baha answered them all, because we wouldn't have the body of knowledge that we have if people didn't ask questions and if he hadn't answered them. But John didn't ask him any questions. And I think he liked that. So I'm saying that with great care, because I don't want to discredit the importance of asking questions. But I really got the sense that Abdu'l-Baha could really relax around John Bosch and not be asked. And there's that passage where I think it's on 160. Oh yeah, okay, 166. And for those of you with a Kindle, it's in the chapter called Abdu'l-Baha is in the utmost longing to see you. And it's kind of right dead in the center of the chapter. So it might be hard to find it on the Kindle, but it's the paragraph that says, although you are here. So Mary, I don't know if you have the book handy. And maybe you'd like to read it, Mary. It's this passage that says, it's on page 166.
It says, although you are here with these assembled friends and cannot speak with them, nor they with you, yet you can speak with them, yet you can speak with one another through the heart. The language of the heart is even more expressive than the language of the tongue, and is more truthful, and has a wider reach and a more potent effect. When lovers meet, it may be that they cannot exchange a single word, yet with their hearts they speak to one another. Thus do the clouds speak to the earth, and the rain comes down, the breeze whispers to the trees. This is the way in which the hearts of the friends talk together. It is the harmony between two persons, and this harmony is of the hearts. For instance, you were in America and I was in the Holy Land. Although our lips were still, yet with our hearts we were conversing together. The friends here love you very much. They have a real attachment for you, although with the tongue they cannot express it.
Mm-hmm.
I read that passage yesterday when I was thinking of today, and I thought, I feel as if, because in Paris talks, Abdu'l-Baha talks about your thought. If a thought of war comes, you change it to a thought of peace. He talks about the thoughts that will spread and change things. And here he's talking about the language of the heart. And I think in the future, science will find a reason for how thoughts and the feelings of the heart spread. And it's just a beautiful passage.
Mhm.
The other thing I loved about Abdu'l-Baha's relationship to John, I was reading last night when he pulls him into the car. He just pulls him into the car. And Abdu'l-Baha puts his arm around John's waist, around his back. Who else did he do that with? Nobody that I know of. And then with a big sigh, he fell asleep on his shoulder. And I just got this picture of him pulling him into the cab, putting his arm around his waist, and having that half hour, which the friends wanted Abdu'l-Baha to do sightseeing, and Abdu'l-Baha chose to refresh himself with John. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it is stunning, that moment. And I think you're right when you say, I don't know of anyone else he did that with.
So that was so beautiful. Thank you, Mary Kay, and thank you, Angie. Just a clarification from Debbie. Of course, I know that Debbie lives on a houseboat, so she has written to us that she is not going to be getting goats, and what she is adding to her to-do list is to make a list of her special life events as a Baha'i. And I love that idea. I think we should all do that, and it's going to help with our writing our family histories as well. And it's just nice for ourselves to be reminded and for our families to have that. What a beautiful, beautiful thought. Thank you, Debbie. Before we open it up for questions, and I'll turn it back to Rob, one last question for you, Angie, which is, in this book club, we're trying to read the books that will inspire us to serve the 9-year plan in special ways. And we've read books of people doing all different acts of service. So from your writing of this book, what do you think is the inspiration for us to continue to serve the 9-year plan?
Yeah. It is really hard to put into words what it must have been like when John and Louise were handed a portion of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha given to them by Shoghi Effendi and asked to deliver it. Now, I'll relate this to the 9-year plan. Asked to deliver it to the convention. So we have now the document, which is being delivered to the cradle of the administrative order. And that, coupled with the tablets of the divine plan, they have now, John and Louise have experienced 2 of those 3 charters on a very personal level. And that we're in a plan that we will, that started with Abdu'l-Baha writing them. And we are in that plan, obviously. And that plan, the succession of plans, will go on until the golden age, the House of Justice said. That we will have succession upon succession of plans that are all born from the tablets of the divine plan. And then the will and testament laying the social network for how we will live. So in the December 30th, 2021 message, we know we have those themes almost memorized, is how that letter is divided. It's divided, remember, it starts with movement of clusters. And then there's that section on learning from the advanced clusters. Then there's the section on social transformation. And then there's the section on educational endeavors and the Training Institute. And those sections have gotten a whole lot of consultation. The last section has yet to experience the level of consultation it will require for us to unfurl this new world order. And that last section, remember, is called Raising Capacity for administration at all levels. And in the very first paragraph of that section, they quote the Guardian. And that part, the rest of this, up until now, I've got this all memory, but this part I had to write down because I don't have this quotation memorized. The first quotation in that section of the 9-year plan, it says, the Guardian described Baha'i administration as the first shaping of what in future will come to be the social life and laws of community life. And we also know that from World Order of Baha'u'llah, the phrase, the society building power of the cause, comes from that paragraph in World Order of Baha'u'llah, where the Guardian says all of that is generated from the administrative order. And so John Bosch was in many ways an example to us of how to function in the administrative order. We learn how to function on an assembly from him. We learn how to function on a committee. We learn how to carry out a teaching project. We learn how to remember where the focal center is. And in many ways, it's an instruction in this aspect of the 9-year plan that will get more and more attention. This section called, raising capacity of administration at all levels. The other thing I'll mention is that in the annual report of the National Spiritual Assembly last year, so this is last April's annual report, which is posted on the website. It's 185 pages long. In the first 4 pages, there's a cover letter. And after that, like in May, we were asked during feast to study that cover letter. In that cover letter, the National Spiritual Assembly, and now I'm paraphrasing, basically said, there are 4 things we're concerned about. And they even said, we're not excluding, not the exclusion of other things, but these are 4 things that we are concerned about. One of them, they mentioned, is how can we get more and more people to engage in the process of the institute process? How can we, in fact, their words were, how can we get more and more people to realize the seamless endless potential, they use the word potential of the institute process. Second thing, how can we encourage more enrollments? How can we bring that about? Third thing, how can we help more believers in America understand their mission given to them by the Guardian in Advent of Divine Justice? And the last one, how can we get more and more people to contribute to the fund? John Bosch was a model on all 4 levels. So I have those 4 things that the National Spiritual Assembly listed in their cover letter, which I just said in the order they listed it, but now I'll put it in my order because I turned it into an acronym, FIRE. FIRE means the fund. John Bosch put that first all the time. I in the word FIRE, so F fund, I for institute process. How can we get more and more people engaged in the divine plan, which right now we call the institute process? R, race. How can we get more and more people to really understand the mission that was given to us to eliminate racial prejudice in America? And then E for enrollments. John Bosch put all those first. There's that chapter 9, which I just love that chapter, not alone of the mind, but of the depths of the heart, where John Bosch went to that conference in 1926. Louis Gregory gives his seminal speech where he ends it with "to move the world," that's where we get that phrase. John Bosch was in the audience. He starts Geyserville Baha'i School in 1927 and makes race on the agenda. So every one of those 4 points that are of a concern to the National Spiritual Assembly, the fund, the institute process, race, and enrollments. One can learn a lot about in this book.
Fantastic. And I will share that cover letter so we can read again these 4 points that you so beautifully summarized. Rob, let me turn it over to you because our friends will have questions.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment also. Thank you, Angie, for that really fantastic summary. I'll remember the word fire now as a great way of summarizing it. I really appreciate that little acronym that you've given us. So, and it's even more interesting that it's almost exactly the reverse, so that it even helps you remember the order. You just have to remember it's sort of the other way around. I wanted to mention one way I measure Abdu'l-Baha's, shall we say, attachment or interest in somebody, and that's that he would invite them frequently to accompany him. And in the course of the research I did on Abdu'l-Baha's visit to America, I noticed that one of the ways Abdu'l-Baha accompanies people is to have them accompany him, if you know what I mean. And so having John Bosch travel to Washington and then to New York, which meant that he was really with Abdu'l-Baha's party, you know, that little close member of that party for 2 weeks. That's an immensely powerful time in terms of spiritual growth and development. He had George Gladimer come spend time with him up at Dublin, for example, for 5 or 6 days. He had Howard Colby Ives come up and spend time there. He had Harlan Ober and his future wife, Grace Ober, Grace Robarts, accompanying him, well, Grace accompanying him from Chicago to New York and then helping to work at the house that he was renting. And these were all opportunities for these individuals to be right there with the master for periods of time, and they would be transformed by that experience. And then they would go out and they would do incredible things for the faith. And so that's, I think, quite an amazing privilege that Abdu'l-Baha gave John Bosch right there. So that's one thing that occurs to me. You said if other people have questions, what questions do we have, I think? And we have people, we're going to have them raise their hands, I suppose, so that we can single them out, and Gisu can then activate your microphone if you don't. So do other people have comments and questions?
Pat Samari has a question.
Okay, Pat, please.
Hi, hi Angelina. I love your background and your history and your whole presentation. You're remarkable. My question is, are you currently working on another book? Or have you just finished one? I would love to know.
Yes. 2 things. One, I wrote a novel that has just about passed review. There are just a couple, really just, when I say a couple, just a couple things I need to address in it. And it's an attempt at reaching a commercial audience with a story about a character who's not a Baha'i and doesn't become a Baha'i in the end of the story. But it takes place during the time of in 1920 in Jordan, and he lives in the southern desert, and it's so the title of the novel is Wadi of the Southern Desert. And he meets in different parts of the story, meets individuals who are Baha'is. And one is a man who is connected with Adasiya, the village of Abdu'l-Baha where he raised all the wheat. So I'm really excited about that. I have an illustrator who's done some beautiful illustrations of birds from the Conference of the Birds, because that poem makes its way into the story. And his name is Lawrence Heggie. Some of you may know his work. He's on Baha'i Blog a lot. He's from Australia. So I'm very excited about it. I'll probably self-publish it. because our publishing trust isn't and should not be, I don't believe, in the business of publishing novels. It has to pay attention to the holy text or biographies, because no one else out there can do that but our U.S. Publishing Trust. But a novel can be done anywhere. So that is forthcoming. And then I have something to share with you that I actually would really appreciate anyone's help with. The U.S. Publishing Trust has asked me to write a biography of Martha Root that relates her story to the plan and more closely. It doesn't replace Garris's wonderful and definitive Lioness at the Threshold. That will be the encyclopedia of Martha Root's life. So they're not asking for an encyclopedic biography of Martha Root, one that's more thematically based, kind of like the John Bosch book is, that relates it to Baha'i teachings and themes and the plan that we're in. So please, Gisu, share my email with anyone who wants it. If there is something special that you just love about Martha Root, believe it or not, it really helps a writer to know what, like when I started the John Bosch book, I asked a lot of people, what do you like about John Bosch? And I got all kinds of answers that don't necessarily make their way into the book, but it helps understand what people are touched by, so that one writer doesn't get down one path and forget the things that might be important to other people. So I'm working on that, and I have a pretty tight deadline. So don't wait. If there's something you love about Martha Root's life, make sure you tell me. I also wanted to say two disclaimers there, is that if any of you are wanting to write something, and I know Christine Leonard Young is here, and Robert's here, and Gisu and Iran, I know there are other writers here in the room. We're always working with the best information we have, and that information changes. And so, for instance, on the Bosch book, I was going on Balyuzi's account of who was present at the time of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. And, you know, who would think that Balyuzi had it wrong? So Balyuzi had it wrong. Rosenberg was not there that night. She came 3 days later. But back when I was writing it, I was going on Balyuzi's account. So we are always working with the best information that we have. And writers also are writers, not typists. I'm not a typist. There's a difference, if you know what I mean, between being a writer and being a typist. So any typo that you catch, tell me. I won't be offended at all. Tell me. I know we've already heard of one. I think I've already caught all of them. Chris Martin and I have caught them all, but don't hesitate to tell me, because there will be a second edition, and that's when we can correct those typographical errors. I mean, you wouldn't believe the number of people who go through these and still we miss things. It's unbelievable how that can happen, and it's heartbreaking, but it shows that we're imperfect in our telling of these stories, and we're telling about perfection, and in our own imperfection, we're trying to tell about the perfect exemplar, and it's a very difficult task. And then last word on your question, Pat, thank you, is when years ago I started writing the biography of Keith Ransom, but when I was in the archives, I asked Roger Dahl, I said, well, is anyone else writing on Keith Ransom Keller? Because if someone else is, then I'll just do something else. And he said, many books can be written on Keith Ransom Keller. And I thought, oh my gosh, of course, I never thought about that. So many books can be written on John Bosch. Many books can be written on Martha Root and on Thornton Chase and on Syed Mustafa Rumi. And it's such a good thing for us to remember. So there's a long-winded answer to your question, is if there's anything that really touches you about Martha Root that you would like to share, I would love to hear it tomorrow or today or day after tomorrow at the latest.
Yep. Another question from Karen Fanana Pazir. Do you have any additional information about Louise's life after John Bosch passed away?
Yeah. You know, some of us, I was able to interview Anita Chapman, Leroy Iowas's daughter. I was able to interview her before she died. And because I was trying to find anyone who had memories of John and Louise. And of course, she had memories of both of them. And one of the questions I wanted to know was, I just was curious, you know, like, did they speak with an accent?
Yeah,
I mean, I just was curious.
I was too.
And she said that John did, but that Louise less. It was less noticeable in Louise. And but you know, Louise came from that eccentric group. You know, she was remembered by Lua Getzinger as one of her, what Lua called her Star Five. Miriam Haney was in that group, and they were all kind of kooky. You know, they were out there. And I think that the only way you could really be attracted to the cause was to not be mainstream and to be eccentric. And so Louise was eccentric in her time. And I think that eccentricity carried on into her later life. And so when I was talking to Anita on the phone, she talked about all these eccentricities of Louise's, about how she would, you know, go around to each house and call out to God and talk to God in each of the buildings, and, you know, bring in the presence of God, almost like a seance. And I didn't put it in the book because I just thought it was too out there. You know, it didn't seem to serve any purpose, but I thought it was really fascinating about her. And there's a delightful letter it's in the book, of when they start corresponding, and how she's sort of in a passive aggressive way tries to tell John that, you know, he shouldn't be making wine. And she explains all these reasons why. And it kind of gives you a preview to their marriage, that she was a lot younger, but she also, though, was very, very intuitive about what they needed to do next. And I ended that chapter just before they go to, they're going to Tahiti, and he sees someone with a book called Towards Isfahan. And John says, don't let my wife see that book, because we're not going to Isfahan.
Yeah, that was quite clever. That's really quite interesting. Where did you hear that particular little anecdote anyway?
It's in the notes in the papers of John. It's in his own notes.
Interesting. Christine has a question.
I wanted to just add that for the person that asked about Herigel, Jennifer Weavers put quite a bit about him in her book Alman Nobloch, because it had a lot to do with how her service in Germany went, and how she had to be very quiet about it. Like you say, it's a very sensitive issue when somebody they knew was ill, and caused a lot of unpleasantness. But Abdu'l-Baha dealt with that situation. And so the book outlines how Abdu'l-Baha dealt with the uncomfortableness that Alma observed, and just honored what Abdu'l-Baha did, and tried not to be, you know, anything but wonderful herself. Yeah. I think Jennifer took a very difficult subject and made it really beautifully well done as an example. Yeah.
I was just thinking about it as a contrast to having John Bosch being the companion of Abdu'l-Baha, for so much of the time. And when Abdu'l-Baha was in Germany, up much to Alma Knobloch's dismay, he chose Herigel to be his companion.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, we talked about this when we reviewed that book in this. In retrospect, it was Abdu'l-Baha trying to steer Herigel on the straight path, and kind of eventually to no avail. But it was kind of a different scenario where Abdu'l-Baha spent time with someone he probably didn't feel as comfortable with, as he couldn't fall asleep on his shoulder.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah, there's a long history of Abdu'l-Baha keeping other potential troublemakers close to
right,
him,
right.
Right.
including Amin
Exactly.
Farid, for example, and Sohrab, and yeah, definitely. What other comments or questions do we have? Someone notes how interesting it was that Louise almost married Lua Getzinger's brother.
Mhm.
And that is interesting. He was actually scheduled to go to India with Hooper Harris right before he passed away, and Harlan Ober had to go instead. So there's that whole other side of that story too, that different team of people ended up going to India because Mr. Moore died.
Mhm.
So I think those are all of our questions. Thank you so much, Angelina and Rob, for joining us today. Thank you to all the members of the book club. I'll be in touch about our book for December. Rob and I are also trying to put together a list for our books through the end of June, because it's taking some time for them to be mailed, and it's just better if we have that list. Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about the exciting upcoming programs at the Corinne True Center?
Sure. Well, we have 2 webinars coming up in December. The first one is 2 weeks from today on the 8th of December, and then the next one after that is a week later on the 8 plus 7, 15th. We have on the 8th, Steve Collins is going to be talking about African-American journalists, Baha'is who are journalists. And that should be quite an interesting presentation, because turns out there's like 3 or 4 or 5 fairly prominent African-American journalists who were Baha'is in the mid-20th century. And he's been doing a lot of research on them. Then on the 15th, Violetta Zane is going to be talking about Shoghi Effendi's travels in Africa. As you may know, Shoghi Effendi traveled the length of the continent from South Africa all the way up to Egypt twice, once in the 20s and once, I think it was in the early 40s, sort of on the eve of World War II. He had to get back to Haifa from Britain in that case, and the Mediterranean was too dangerous, so he had to go all the way down by steamer to South Africa, and then he and Ruhi Khanum traveled the length of Africa, mostly by train, because in those days you could actually take a train most of the way. So those are going to be very interesting presentations, and we're really looking forward to those. In January, we have 2 courses starting, and I'm trying to remember what the first one is in January. Now I'm having a little trouble remembering which one it is, but we're going to be having an introduction to Baha'i scripture starting towards the end of January, and that's going to be a semester-long course, which will be sort of graduate level, but not for credit. So you don't have to do homework if you don't want to. But it should be quite an exciting course, and we're looking forward to advertising that and collecting students. Ah, yes, and the other course I remember is titled Paul and the Epistles from Baha'i and Historical Perspective. We're going to look at the Apostle Paul, and we're going to look at the various letters in the New Testament, making up the New Testament, especially the ones by Paul himself, or ones attributed to Paul, because about half the epistles in the New Testament attributed to Paul are not actually by him, near as we can tell. And there's a Baha'i in Scotland who is currently doing a doctorate at the University of Edinburgh about Paul, and he's going to be one of the faculty for that particular course. So that should be a really interesting course, because we're going to look at the whole question of, what was Paul's motivation? How does the teachings that he brought compare to the Baha'i teachings and that kind of thing? So it should be a very useful course for the friends. We're still finishing up our 2025 course schedule. We have the names of the courses identified, but we're still finalizing the dates and the faculty, and all of that should be available probably I hope in another few days or a week. So that's the report.
Fantastic. Angelina, I hope you're seeing all the wonderful comments you're getting. It echoes what
Oh.
all of us are feeling.
Oh, how nice. No, I haven't. Oh, I'm so terrible at looking. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. I
Click
will.
on chat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the book. It was very inspiring, extremely well written. Thank you so much. Thank you for today. Thank you for the book. So we all echo that praise and gratitude. So thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
And be sure to email me what you love about Martha Root.
We'll do that. Thank you.